The voices on the inside are like the voices outside. Mostly they're kind, sometimes they're not. But if you just remember to read their lips or letters, you'll never have to mind if they're spewing lots of rot. I love Critical Role. I love their unscripted, unedited, 4 hour long campaign sessions. It's like being in a writer's room, watching a final dress rehearsal with tech cues and bloopers all rolled into one. It makes me homesick for theater nerds and rehearsal schedules and going off on a fucking tangent anytime anybody gets fucking scared of a disembodied voice that literally can't hurt you unless you light a torch. And even then, it's not the voice hurting you, it's the shadow of your own fucking hand in the fucking torchlight, which you were warned not to travel by before you even headed into the eternal night. But sure, yeah, let's sexualize the shadow strangler and vilify the totally calm, totally casual voice you could have just ignored. Great, 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 great. Here's the thing. On a very rainy day when I was still in high school, my parents and my sisters and I piled into the family van, like you do, and drove to Philly. We're a big family of big personalities, so we all talked the whole long way. And after a while, I stopped spinning this way and that to see who was talking. I looked out the window as we passed an accident. My sister still laughing, red ambulance lights flashing, my sister's cracking jokes, red lights reflecting, my sister's laughing louder, rain-soaked streets glowing red, my sister's quoting Bill Murray, and I thought of a joke. An absolutely inspired joke, perfect for the moment, that reworked a Bill Murray line from the courtroom scene of Ghostbusters 2, and I said it. Well, there was already so much blood in the streets, we didn't think anybody would notice. Problem number one. I started laughing at my own joke as soon as I started to say it, and completely mangling the delivery so that the only really coherent thing to survive was the phrase, blood in the streets. Problem number two. While my sisters had been talking and laughing, they hadn't been talking and laughing about anything that would have made my joke make any kind of sense. Because at some unknown point, I had stopped listening to my sisters and instead listened to the voices in my head, camouflaged as my sisters' voices. And my sister's response was immediate, unrelenting mockery. There was no fear, no revulsion. Rosie hearing voices? Not new. Rosie saying something off the wall? Also not new. We call that we knew. But blood in the streets? Blood in the streets? 20 years on and they are still going strong. I could be on my deathbed and one of my sisters, saying one last goodbye, could lean down close to my ear and say as solemn as a prayer, blood in the streets. I will never live it down. And that's fine. That's dandy. But that's my sisters being jerks. Not the voices being jerks. The voices are hilarious. The voices are loving. The voices are vulnerable. The voices are part of me and so live rent-free in the karaoke bar. That is my brain. While you, at Critical Role, beloved storytellers all have been taken in by and perpetuated a lie. The great American lie that you cannot trust your own mind. That if you hear voices, whatever voice you hear is evil. If it's all in your head, that makes you evil. If it's a supernatural entity, you will be made evil by the end of the story. Either way, the only question left to be answered, according to this lie, is whether you will be destroyed by the end of whatever story you are unlucky enough to be a part of. But as I said, that's a lie. Want to know the truth? 2/3 of all people who hear voices have a positive experience hearing voices. The world is unfair, and yet 2/3 of all people who hear voices have a positive experience hearing voices. Life is unfair, and still 2/3 of all people who hear voices have a positive experience hearing voices. Nature can seem so cruel and uncaring, yet somehow 2/3 of all people who hear voices have a positive experience hearing voices. Which begs the question, beloved storytellers, Do 2/3 of all people who hear voices in your stories have a positive experience hearing voices in your stories, demons included? Because in Hammer & Home, the great American lie that you cannot trust your own mind, demons are like super popular. The voices on the inside are like the voices outside. Mostly they're kind, sometimes they're not. But if you just remember to read their lips or letters, you'll never have to mind if they're spewing lots of rot. Above the table, IRL, stories of demons and evil round out the great American lie that you cannot trust your own mind by turning your attention away from facts, certain facts, and drawing a false equivalence between the shrinking number of people who believe in demons and the actual number of people who experience hearing voices. Believing is a choice. Hearing is a function, and hearing voices is not rare. It is statistically common. 1 in 10 people is not rare. It is statistically common. 1 in 10 people is more common than naturally occurring redheads. People who hear voices outnumber natural redheads 8-1. The American childhood gifts us with a taste of standing up to the lie and trusting ourselves when at some point we are taught not to fall for peer pressure. And you would think in a world where 1 in 10 people experience hearing voices and more than half of all children experience having imaginary friends, that lessons in peer pressure would easily lead to lessons in hear pressure. If all your corporeal friends jumped off a bridge, would you? No. So why would you do it when your non-corporeal friends tell you to? Forget having no skin in the game. They have no skin or bones, no flesh or sinew. So don't do the stupid things they tell you to do. But what does this mean in game? When there are 13 player characters, it means one of those characters needs to hear voices for neurological, non-magical reasons. And the other players, in addition to their own characters, get to act as non-player voices, not to be confused with non-player characters. A game master creates a multitude of non-player characters to further develop their world building and storytelling. Non-player voices, on the other hand, exist for character development and hijinks. They never say anything out of character. For the player character, they mimic, so far as the player character who hears them knows, or which the player voicing them wants that player character to intuit about the player character behind the mimic. Out of view, the player whose character hears voices, the other players each roll nothing higher than a D10 to see how many lines of dialogue they are each allowed to speak over the course of the session as a non-player voice. Players may pool their numbers to mimic a group conversation similar to what I've experienced when surrounded by family. Confusion among players who speak as non-player voices can be mitigated by signaling each other in some way that changes from session to session to preserve immersion for the player whose character hears voices. I leave the hijinks to you. The voices on the inside are like the voices outside. Mostly they're kind, sometimes they're not. But if you just remember to read their lips or letters, you'll never have to mind if they're spewing lots of rot. Still, I cannot leave you wholly alone. I can't just tell you how good things are where you aren't looking. I can't just tell you you're surrounded and then leave you alone to your own devices as if muscle memory won't creep back into the text of what you say and do. I can't leave you alone like I was left alone to figure it out on my own. Tanya Luhrmann, an anthropologist, looks at the cultural variations of hearing voices. Her work suggests the harsh, violent voices so common in the West may not be an inevitable feature of hearing voices, and that the way people pay attention to their voices alters what they hear the voices say. I was a kid with imaginary friends. I never actually saw them, but I knew what they looked like because They sounded like my favorite characters and movies and TV. But it was confusing because kids on TV can see their imaginary friends. We can see the kids seeing their friends, pointing out where they are, screaming if someone sits there. I know where my friends are, generally, and I know they know to avoid chairs, and there was never just one, like with kids on TV. One at a time? Sure. A few that showed up more than the others? Definitely. But never just one, and never done. On TV, they're there one episode, point out something missing from your life, and then you get that thing. The friend's work is done, and the friend goes away. Full House, Growing Pains, even Drop Dead Fred stuck the landing after a 16-year hiatus, trapped inside a Jack-in-the-Box. I couldn't think of anything that was missing. No great life lesson to be learned. They were just around. But I started noticing other stories of people hearing voices that always turned out to be evil and always pulled the people they spoke to into their meanness until they were both destroyed. I never actually saw my friends, and they never resolved anything, and other kids called me a baby or weird, and the Bible talks about demons and devils and possession and needing Christ or an apostle because the priest in the confessional doesn't have answers or tools or resources, and the voices were getting meaner and meaner, and I didn't want to be mean, and my friends were getting quieter and quieter, and I didn't want to be alone, and I didn't want to be alive, and I also didn't want to be destroyed. So I asked for help, but the people I asked knew the same stories I knew and more, so their fears were added to mine, and the voices got meaner and meaner, and I tried, I don't know how many medications that now shroud those days in a gray mist up until the night of the fight. I know I was alone because I was screaming, and the only response was the screaming already happening inside of me. I don't remember what started it or pushed it so far. That screaming back was my only release, my only reprieve. I only remember being alone in the house and lonely in my own skin and homesick for all the friends I used to carry with me. I was homesick for myself and fed up with how far things had gone and still going, and one way or another, I was done. And so I screamed into the night. We used to be friends. We used to have fun. Don't you miss that? Don't you miss being friends? Don't you want to be friends? And then everything was quiet. The voices were quiet, and one of my old friends spoke for the first time in years, and in a voice more tender and more loving than any I had ever known. She said yes. I poured out what was left of all my medications into the palm of my hand, felt their weight, and let them go with an unceremonious flush. I was done. It took 10 years to go from friends to foes, and I was done beating myself up. It would take another 10 to name every voice and rebuild every friendship and rewrite every story that ever told me to fear a mind perfectly capable of being changed over a hand whose actions can never be undone. I was done. And I invite you to be done, to change your mind and have fun, to get really into dream interpretation and lucid dreaming, to follow your curiosity and bring your therapist along for the ride. No, really, bring your therapist, someone cool with EMDR and hypnotherapy, as I am sincerely begging you, do not white knuckle this like I did. There is no telling how much I have lost in time and resources and relationships and opportunities because I didn't trust anyone to help me. I didn't know trust is a muscle. Build it a little at a time. Start with a nursery rhyme, a simple thing, shared easily, one person at a time. Talk about what the words mean, how nursery rhymes hold what is or could be common knowledge, as common as hearing voices, how the voices heard inside and out are kind more often than not, how reading lips or keeping a kind of dream dictionary of what voices say can remind you what is real and what is metaphor. Find someone who can sing, you can sing the rhyme to, and if in talking to them their friendship seems brave and true, you might try sharing this strange, long beast of a poem. And if they respond well to this, maybe you could form a kind of study hall, learning about dreaming and looking for therapists and thumbing through books of baby names for every voice you hear, every part of you in need of feeling heard and seen without seeing. Please do not do this alone. Your time is precious. And please do not add to the tales of terror that already overwhelm and bully us into fearing ourselves, making it harder to seek and find the help we need to live with ourselves as friends. The voices on the inside are like the voices outside. Mostly they're kind, sometimes they're not. But if you just remember to read their lips or letters, you'll never have to mind if they're spewing lots of rot.